What happens when a waitress thinks she's dealing with just another customer, but that customer turns out to be the wife of the most feared man in town? Have you ever seen a situation spiral completely out of control, all because of one single careless choice? That's exactly what happened on a scorching Thursday afternoon inside a crowded diner in downtown Tulsa, Oklahoma. People came in hungry, tired, and cranky from the heat, but they weren't expecting to witness something that would have the whole city talking within days. The place was Lou's Diner, a family-owned spot that had been around for decades. The kind of joint where the smell of bacon grease and coffee clung to the walls, where truckers sat next to business folks in suits, and where regulars had their usual waiting before they even slid into the booth. It wasn't fancy, but it was busy, and today it was too busy. Behind the counter was Jessica Whitmore, 24 years old, in her third year working at Lou's. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy bun, a pencil tucked behind her ear, and her sneakers had seen far better days. She wasn't new to stress, but something about today hit her harder. Orders were piling up, the fryer was acting up, and one of her coworkers had called in sick. That meant Jessica was stuck running nearly half the floor by herself. "Jess, table 9's been waiting for their check 15 minutes, the cook hollered from the kitchen window, sliding a plate of chicken fried steak under the heat lamp. "I'm coming, all right?" she snapped back, not even realizing how sharp her tone was until the words were already out. Her hands moved fast, dropping off drinks, taking plates, wiping spills, but her mind was elsewhere. She was already imagining the manager complaining, customers leaving bad tips, and the long lecture she'd get at the end of her shift. Jessica wasn't a bad person. She was just tired. Tired of smiling when she didn't feel like it. Tired of apologizing for things that weren't her fault. And most of all, tired of being treated like she was invisible by the very people she served. But then the front door swung open, and that's when everything started to change. A woman stepped inside, moving carefully, but with a kind of quiet strength. Her name was Danielle Hayes, late 20s, soft brown curls falling just past her shoulders, a calmness in her face that only added to her presence. She wore a light blue dress that complemented her glowing skin, one hand resting gently on her pregnant belly. The diner noise softened just a little as she made her way to an empty booth by the window. People noticed her, but not in the way they usually notice strangers. Something about her carried weight, like she wasn't just another customer. Jessica glanced over while refilling a man's coffee and muttered under her breath, "Great, just what I needed." Another high-maintenance order. She didn't know Danielle, had never seen her before in her life. But Jessica had worked long enough to build assumptions. A well-dressed woman walking in alone during peak lunch hours, asking for special treatment. In Jessica's mind, she could already hear the requests. Extra this, none of that, gluten-free bread, more napkins, and, her personal favorite, sending food back until it was exactly perfect. Jessica tugged at her apron, grabbed her notepad, and plastered on a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Afternoon. What can I get started for you?" Danielle looked up, kind but firm. "Hi, yes, before I order, could I just ask something? I'm pregnant, and I have a few dietary restrictions. Would the kitchen be able to prepare my meal a certain way?" And there it was, the request Jessica had already predicted. She forced a laugh that sounded thin. "Well, I can't promise they'll roll out the red carpet, but I'll write down what you want." Danielle's eyes flickered with surprise at the sarcasm, but she kept her tone even. "I understand. I'll make it simple," but what seemed simple to Danielle didn't feel simple to Jessica. Not today. Not with sweat running down her back, tables calling her over, and her patience wearing thinner by the second. She scribbled notes, half-heartedly, already annoyed before the first plate even hit the table. But what Jessica didn't realize was that this small moment, this tiny exchange of words, was the very first crack in a situation that would blow wide open in front of everyone. Jessica leaned against the counter for half a second, eyes flicking across the diner. Every booth was full. Kids dropped French fries onto the floor while parents argued about the check. A construction crew laughed too loud at the back table, their boots leaving red dust across the tiles. The coffee machine sputtered like it was on its last leg. Her nerves were pulled so tight she thought one more request might snap them. And sure enough, Danielle raised her hand politely. Jessica sighed through her teeth, grabbed her notepad, and walked back to the booth. "Yes, ma'am?" Danielle smiled. "I just wanted to double-check before you put the order in. Could the eggs be scrambled dry, no butter, and the toast plain? I can't have dairy right now. Oh, and if they have spinach instead of hash browns, I'd really appreciate that. Jessica's pen tapped against the paper. Tap, tap, tap. Scrambled dry, no butter, plain toast, spinach instead. Got it. She didn't hide her annoyance well, and Danielle noticed. Look, I know it's a lot. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. Jessica shot back quickly. You think you're the only one with special needs today? Half the diner's asking for something. I'll do what I can. Danielle tilted her head slightly, not angry, just thoughtful. I wasn't trying to make your day harder. The words hung in the air. Jessica didn't answer. She spun on her heel, slipped the order into the kitchen window, and walked away before Danielle could say more. At the counter, a regular named Mr. Randall, a retired mailman who came in every Thursday, leaned in and muttered just loud enough for Jessica to hear. She asked polite, Jess. Don't see the harm, Jessica bristled. You want an apron, Randall? Maybe you can handle it instead. He raised his eyebrows but said nothing more. Still, his silence carried more judgment than any lecture. Meanwhile, Danielle adjusted herself in the booth, one hand on her stomach. She took a deep breath and pulled out her phone, scrolling quietly. She wasn't here to fight. She wasn't here to cause trouble. She just wanted a simple meal that wouldn't upset her health. But that didn't matter to Jessica, who was now venting under her breath as she poured a glass of ice water. Some people think the world revolves around them, she muttered. The cubes clinked against the glass, her grip a little too tight. When she set the water down in front of Danielle, her tone was clipped. Here you go. Danielle nodded politely. Thank you. Jessica didn't move. For some reason, she stood there a second longer, staring at Danielle. Maybe she was daring her to ask for something else. Maybe she was already regretting how she spoke, but didn't know how to take it back. Danielle noticed the stare, gave a small, cautious smile, and said softly, I can see you've got a lot on your plate. I didn't mean to add to it, Jessica snorted, half laughing. Trust me, it's already overflowing. And then, like a small spark brushing against dry wood, the mood in that booth shifted. Danielle's kindness wasn't met with kindness, it was met with sarcasm. And everyone knows how fast a spark can turn into fire. The waitress stalked off to deal with another table, her sneakers squeaking against the tile. Danielle sipped her water quietly, her calm expression never breaking. But inside, she was already weighing whether she should say something to the manager or just let it go. She decided to wait. But Jessica wouldn't give her the chance, because the next move wasn't Danielle's to make. It was Jessica's, and that move would change everything. By the time Danielle's order reached the kitchen window, Jessica's nerves were shot. The cook, Earl, glanced at the ticket and groaned. Dry eggs? No butter? Spinach instead of hash browns? What is this, a health spa? He barked, wiping his forehead with a greasy towel. Jessica snapped back. Just make it, Earl. Don't start with me. He muttered something under his breath, but got to work, slapping eggs onto the flat top. Jessica busied herself with the other tables, though she kept darting glances at Danielle, who sat calmly scrolling through her phone. That calmness irritated her more than anything. It felt like Danielle was above the chaos, untouched, while Jessica was drowning in it. By the time the plate was ready, Jessica slammed it onto her tray a little too hard. The eggs wobbled, nearly sliding off. She steadied them with her thumb, grumbling. When she set the plate in front of Danielle, she forced a smile. Here you go. Eggs, toast, spinach. Danielle looked at the plate carefully, then back at Jessica. Thank you. Did they make sure no butter was used? Jessica's jaw tightened. It's dry eggs. That's what the ticket said. Danielle hesitated, studying the eggs. I just want to be sure. Butter makes me sick right now. That was it. Jessica lost her patience. She leaned on the table, voice dropping low. Lady, do you really think I have time to march back there and interrogate Earl about your eggs? If I say it's dry, it's dry. Eat it or don't. Gasps came from the table behind them. A couple of college kids looked up from their burgers, wide-eyed. Danielle blinked slowly. Her voice stayed calm, but it carried weight. I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm pregnant. I can't afford to take chances. Her hand rested protectively on her stomach as she spoke. Something about that gesture should have softened Jessica, but instead, Jessica felt something hot rise in her chest. Defiance, irritation, maybe embarrassment because the whole diner was now listening. One of the college kids whispered, "Dang, she's pregnant." "Just check the eggs." Jessica heard it and felt her cheeks flush. She grabbed the plate, stormed back to the kitchen, and shoved it at Earl. "Hey, did you use butter?" Earl raised his hands. "Relax, Jess." "No butter. Dry as a bone. Tell her she's safe." Jessica spun around and marched back to the booth. She slammed the plate down harder than she meant to, silverware clattering. "There. Butter-free. Happy now?" Danielle's eyes met hers, steady and clear. "You don't need to talk to me like that." The silence after those words stretched long and heavy. Customers looked back and forth between them, as if watching a tennis match. Even Mr. Randall at the counter shook his head slowly, mumbling into his coffee. Jessica crossed her arms, suddenly defensive. "You're the one asking for all this extra stuff. You think you're the first person to walk in here pregnant? Plenty of women eat whatever we serve and don't complain." Danielle didn't raise her voice, didn't snap back. She just said one thing, almost gently. "Respect doesn't cost extra." For a moment, Jessica's mask slipped. Her eyes darted to the floor, then back to Danielle. But pride wouldn't let her admit she'd gone too far. She grabbed the water pitcher, filled it halfway, and muttered, "I'll top you off." And with that, she turned too quickly, the water sloshing dangerously close to the rim. Her hand was tense, her movements jerky, as if her own frustration was spilling out along with the ice. But the worst part wasn't that she was angry. It was that she was about to act without thinking, and every single person in that diner would see the result. Jessica's grip on the pitcher tightened as she leaned toward Danielle's glass. The ice shifted, clinking against the glass walls, water trembling near the brim. Danielle moved her phone aside and looked up politely. "Just a little thank you." It could have been so simple. A quick pour, a nod, and on to the next table. But Jessica wasn't thinking about simple. She was thinking about how every eye in the diner was on her, how she felt judged for being rude, how she wanted to prove she wasn't someone people could push around. And then it happened. As she tilted the pitcher, her wrist twisted harder than necessary. Water cascaded not just into the glass, but straight across the table, spilling in a cold wave over Danielle's lap. The ice slid across her dress, soaking the fabric instantly. The sound was sharp, like glass breaking, even though nothing shattered. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. Forks froze halfway to mouths. For a second, the entire diner seemed to inhale at once. Danielle gasped softly, sucking in air as the shock of freezing water hit her skin and belly. She pushed back in the booth, hands instinctively cradling her stomach. Jessica pulled the empty pitcher back with a shrug that was meant to look careless, but her flushed cheeks betrayed her. "Oh, whoops. Guess my hand slipped." A woman at the booth across from Danielle said under her breath, "That didn't look like no accident." The college kids weren't whispering anymore. One of them muttered, "Yo, she straight up dumped it on her." Danielle pressed a napkin against her soaked dress, her voice steady but laced with hurt. "Was that really necessary?" Jessica rolled her eyes, trying to mask her panic with arrogance. "I said it was an accident." "Maybe don't make a big deal out of every little thing." Mr. Randall's coffee cup hit the counter with a sharp clink. He swiveled on his stool, pointing his finger at Jessica. "That's not how we treat folks, Jess. Especially not a woman carrying a child." The cook, Earl, peeked through the kitchen window, spatula still in hand. "What the heck's going on out there?" But Jessica ignored them all. She tossed the pitcher back onto her tray and wiped her hands on her apron, pretending like nothing had happened. Danielle stood slowly, her wet dress clinging to her legs. She looked Jessica straight in the eye, her calm sharper than any yell. "You may think this is about food or water, but it's not. It's about respect." Her words carried, filling the room. Everyone knew she was right. Jessica felt a sting in her chest, something between guilt and fear, but she crossed her arms instead, forcing out a laugh. "Respect? Lady, you're in a diner, not the Ritz. Don't expect the world to bend over backward for you." That was the final straw for several customers. A young mother at the corner table scooped up her toddler, muttering, "I'm not eating here if this is how people get treated." She headed straight for the door. Two others followed, shaking their heads. Danielle didn't raise her voice. She didn't threaten. She just picked up her purse, adjusted her soaked dress with dignity, and said, "You'll regret this one day." The silence after she left was crushing. The bell above the diner door jingled faintly as it closed behind her, the sound oddly final. Jessica stood frozen, heat rushing to her face. Her coworkers stared, customers whispered. For a moment she wondered if she had gone too far, but she didn't yet realize how true Danielle's words were, or how quickly one day would turn into tonight. The diner stayed quiet long after Danielle walked out. It wasn't the kind of quiet that comes with peace. It was the heavy kind, when everyone is thinking the same thing but no one wants to be the first to say it out loud. Jessica tried to busy herself with clearing a table, but her hands shook slightly as she stacked plates. The clatter of silverware against ceramics sounded louder than usual, echoing across the room. Mr. Randall finally broke the silence. "Jess," he said, voice rough but steady. "I've been eating here 20 years, seen good waitresses, bad ones, all kinds, but I ain't never seen someone dump water on a pregnant woman. Not once." Jessica's cheeks burned. "I told you, it was an accident." He shook his head slowly. "No, it wasn't." Everyone here saw it. The two college kids leaned closer, whispering but not nearly quiet enough. "Man, that was cold. She just sat there and took it, didn't even yell." One of them added, "Yeah, but did you see her eyes? She wasn't scared, like she knew something we didn't." Their words buzzed in Jessica's ears, feeding a nervous energy that she couldn't shake. A woman near the front counter cleared her throat. "You know, people talk. Something like this doesn't stay in one place for long." Jessica shot her a sharp look. "So what? She's just another customer. She'll forget about it by tomorrow." But the woman gave a thin smile. "Maybe. Or maybe not. Depends who she knows." That single line hung over Jessica like a storm cloud. She brushed it off with a scoff, but her heart gave a traitorous thud. Earl the cook leaned his elbows on the counter window, spatula in hand. "Look, Jess, I don't care how bad your shift is. You don't pull that stunt. Manager hears about this, you're out, and I ain't covering for you." Jessica slammed the plates down harder than necessary. "I said it was an accident. You think I'd risk my job over some stranger's breakfast?" No one answered, but the silence was worse than an argument. It was the silence of disbelief, of people deciding in their heads that they didn't buy her story. She tried to act tough, but every time she glanced at the door Danielle had walked through, a tightness twisted in her stomach. Something about the way Danielle had said, "You'll regret this one day." It hadn't been a threat. It had sounded like a fact. Jessica muttered to herself, "She doesn't scare me. She's nobody." But deep down, she wasn't sure. At another booth, a young man pulled out his phone. "Should I post about this? People gotta know." Jessica's head snapped toward him. "Don't you dare!" He shrugged. "Freedom of speech. And besides, what you did was messed up." He tucked the phone back in his pocket, but the damage was already done. Jessica knew it. Word would spread whether she wanted it to or not. She took a shaky breath, grabbed another pot of coffee, and tried to pretend everything was fine. Customers sipped quietly, some glaring at her, others avoiding her eyes. The diner, once loud with chatter, now felt like it was holding its breath. When her manager finally stepped out from the back office, Jessica thought she'd get an earful, but he only looked around, frowning at the tension. "What's going on out here?" Nobody answered. Jessica forced a bright smile. "Nothing. Just a busy lunch rush." But the look Mr. Randall gave her across the counter said otherwise, and while Jessica clung to the idea that she could move on like nothing happened, Danielle was already on the phone outside, making a call that would ensure this wasn't over. Outside the diner, Danielle leaned against her car, her wet dress clinging uncomfortably. She dabbed at it with napkins that barely helped. A couple of bystanders who'd witnessed everything from the sidewalk offered her sympathetic glances. One woman even said softly, "I'd have raised hell if that were me." Danielle only smiled faintly. Some battles aren't worth fighting in public. But she wasn't planning on letting it slide. She unlocked her phone, scrolled through her contacts, and pressed one. The call connected quickly. "It happened again," she said into the receiver, her tone calm, measured. "Someone thought they could disrespect me because of how I look, and because they don't know who I am." She listened for a moment, nodding slowly. "No, don't come here. Not yet. I'll handle it." She hung up, slid the phone into her purse, and drove off without another word. Back inside Lou's diner, the shift dragged on painfully for Jessica. Customers trickled out, leaving half-eaten plates behind. The tips she collected were smaller than usual. Some didn't leave anything at all. By the time her manager pulled her aside near closing, she was exhausted, and irritable. "You know I've been getting complaints, right?" he said, arms crossed. "People saying you were rude, that you dumped water on a pregnant woman. What the hell happened?" Jessica crossed her arms, standing her ground. "It was an accident. She was picky, gave me a hard time, and I slipped. People are blowing it out of proportion." Her manager's eyes narrowed. "Be careful, Jess. This is the kind of thing that ruins reputations, and not just yours. This diner's." Jessica rolled her eyes but nodded, pretending to take the warning seriously. Inside, she was fuming. Reputation? Over some random woman who probably won't even come back? But that night, as Jessica walked home through the humid Tulsa air, her phone buzzed with a notification. A local community forum had a new post trending. "Waitress at Lou's Diner dumps water on pregnant woman after she asks for a simple request. I was there, saw the whole thing." Dozens of comments followed. Some demanded the waitress be fired. Others debated what really happened. But one comment caught Jessica's eye. She messed with the wrong woman. "That's Elijah Hayes' wife." Jessica froze on the sidewalk. Her stomach dropped. The name wasn't unfamiliar. Everyone in Tulsa knew of Elijah Hayes. He wasn't a mayor or a celebrity. He was something different. Something more dangerous. He ran construction companies, trucking businesses, and half the nightlife in town. And everyone whispered that he had ties deeper than business, ties that made him untouchable. Jessica muttered aloud, "No way! That can't be true." She scrolled faster, her fingers trembling. Comment after comment confirmed it. Danielle Hayes wasn't just some random customer. She was married to Elijah Hayes, a man people feared even when they'd never met him. Her chest tightened, breaths coming shallow. She thought of Danielle's words, "You'll regret this one day." Jessica stumbled into her apartment, pacing the floor. She won't tell him, she told herself. She wouldn't. It was just water. She won't drag her husband into this. But even as she said it, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a private message from an unknown number. "He knows." Jessica dropped the phone like it was burning her hand. Her apartment, usually her safe place, suddenly felt like it had no walls. She couldn't stop picturing a knock at the door in the middle of the night, faceless men standing in the shadows, ready to make her pay. And she was right to be afraid, because Elijah Hayes wasn't the kind of man who let an insult to his family go unanswered. Jessica barely slept that night. Every creak in her apartment building made her flinch. Every passing car made her peek through the blinds. Her phone sat on the nightstand, dark screen staring back at her, but she couldn't stop checking it every few minutes. By morning, her stomach was in knots. She threw on her uniform, tried to tell herself it was just another shift, and walked to Lou's with shaky steps. But the moment she walked through the diner's doors, she knew something was wrong. The place was quieter than usual. Customers whispered over their coffee, and all eyes seemed to shift toward her. Earl gave her a long, disappointed look from behind the counter. Even the manager barely nodded in her direction. Halfway through her shift, the bell above the door jingled. Jessica turned, and her breath caught. Two men walked in, dressed sharp but casual. Dark slacks, pressed shirts, gold watches that caught the fluorescent lights. They didn't look like regulars, and they didn't look like truckers stopping for a bite. They carried themselves with a quiet authority, the kind that didn't need announcing. They slid into a booth without saying a word. The manager leaned toward Jessica. "They asked for you. Table 4. Her knees nearly buckled. "Me? Why me?" The manager's voice was low. "They said your name." "Go!" Jessica forced herself forward, heart hammering. She set down menus with trembling hands. "Can I get you gentlemen something to drink?" One of them smiled faintly, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Don't worry about the drinks. We're here on behalf of Mr. Hayes." The name hit her like a punch. She gripped the edge of the booth for balance. I don't know what you're talking about." The second man leaned in, voice calm but sharp as glass. "You do." Yesterday, Lou's Diner, pregnant woman, water. Jessica swallowed hard, words tangled in her throat. It was an accident. I swear, I didn't mean." The first man held up a hand, cutting her off. "Mr. Hayes doesn't care about excuses. What he cares about is respect. And when his wife is disrespected, that's the same as disrespecting him." Jessica's voice cracked. Please, I didn't know who she was. Exactly, the man said smoothly. You didn't know. Maybe if you did, you'd have thought twice, but ignorance doesn't erase insult. The second man slid a folded napkin across the table toward her. On it was a phone number. Mr. Hayes wants to hear from you. Tonight. You'll call, and you'll apologize. Jessica's hand shook as she picked up the napkin. What happens if I don't? The first man's smile returned, colder this time. Don't find out. They stood, leaving without another word. The whole diner watched as they exited, the bell above the door jingling once more. Jessica stood rooted in place, her legs weak, napkin clutched in her hand like it weighed 100 pounds. Earl muttered from the counter, Told you, Jess. You don't treat people that way. Jessica wanted to scream at him, at everyone, but her throat closed up. Instead, she slipped the napkin into her apron and stumbled to the back room. She sat on a crate of soda bottles, staring at the number. Calling Elijah Hayes meant stepping into his world. Not calling. She didn't even want to imagine. Her fingers brushed her phone. She whispered to herself, What am I supposed to do? But deep down, she already knew. When a man like Elijah Hayes tells you to call, you don't get a choice. Jessica sat in her apartment that evening staring at the napkin with the phone number written neatly in blue ink. Her hands wouldn't stop sweating. She dialed the number twice, hung up before it rang, and finally forced herself to press call. The line clicked almost instantly. A deep voice answered. This is Hayes. Jessica's throat tightened. Mr. Hayes, it's Jessica, the waitress from Lou's. I was told to call silence on the other end, stretched long enough to make her skin prickle. Then Elijah spoke again, calm but heavy with authority. You poured water on my wife. Her voice cracked. It was an accident. I swear. I didn't know who she was. Please believe me. Another pause, then a quiet chuckle. See, that's the problem. You don't know who people are. You see a woman in a diner, and you decide she's beneath you. You think you can treat people any way you want. That's not just disrespectful, Jessica. It's dangerous. Because someday, the stranger you look down on might not be so powerless. Jessica pressed the phone tighter to her ear, fighting tears. I'm sorry. Please, I'll do anything to make it right. You don't owe me anything, Elijah said firmly. You owe her. Jessica swallowed hard. Can I apologize to her directly? There was a rustle on the line, then a softer, familiar voice came through. I'm here, Jessica. Danielle. Jessica's breath caught. I don't know what to say. I was rude, I was impatient, and I shouldn't have treated you the way I did. You didn't deserve that. I'm so sorry. For a moment, there was nothing. Then Danielle replied, her tone steady. I don't need your fear. I need you to understand. You thought I was just being difficult, when all I wanted was a meal that wouldn't make me sick. You decided my request was less important than your stress, and you punished me for it. Jessica wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. You're right. I was wrong. Danielle's voice softened. I don't want revenge. I want you to remember this. Respect is free, but disrespect, it'll always cost you more than you can afford. The line clicked, ending the call. Jessica sat there in silence, phone slipping from her hand. Relief washed over her, but it was tangled with shame. She hadn't been punished with fists or threats. She'd been punished with truth. The next day, Jessica returned to Lou's diner. She worked her tables quietly, no sarcasm, no shortcuts. Customers noticed. Mr. Randall gave her a nod, one that said maybe, just maybe, she'd learned something. And though Danielle never came back, Jessica never forgot her. Every time she took an order, every time she refilled a glass, she remembered the look in Danielle's eyes and the words Elijah Hayes spoke. Because the truth was clear. You never know who you're serving, and you never know what kind of power or pain someone carries behind their smile. But here's the real lesson, the one this story leaves with you. Never underestimate the value of respect. Not because of who someone's connected to, not because of what they can do to you, but because it's the right thing to give. Always. So ask yourself, how do you treat people when you think no one's watching? If this story made you think, if it stirred something in you, then don't let it end here. Share it, talk about it, and remember it the next time frustration tempts you to treat someone small. Because the truth is, there are no small people. Everyone matters. Respect is free, but disrespect? It'll cost you more than you think.